arranging this session. I'm a little intimidated because I see some very starry writers and scholars in this audience. The theme, expanding the canon, I have a little trouble with that because actually we're not sure whether we have a canon at all in a country like ours. It's because for many years, with the hangover of British translations of our own texts and our, a sense of inferiority about this language which we were trying to collaborate with. Many of our translators, I think, put aside their better judgment and used a certain formal English to translate our own texts, and that itself is an unusual thing because world over the translators actually translate material into their mother tongues. But here we were making this huge effort to move our literatures into this language, which of course, being the crossover global language of power, of prestige, scholarship, and the institution of English studies. So our session will look at how this experience is achieved both with respect and with patience. I'm not a supporter of canons, having worked behind the scenes in 2 very big publishing houses. The first position I lost when I published Bama's Karakan translation in 1999. Another kind of canon fired me off that desk, and I landed not so far away in OUP, which the very first works I introduced there were 2 works by Dalit writers. Rita was the translator of Joseph McQuan's Anguliyat, and Sharan Kumar Limbale's Akarmashi from Marathi was the other. Oxford took 6 or 7 months to even say yes to it, because till then they hadn't published anything remotely like it. The only thing they said yes to was Indulekha, which was 19th century work. So canons are shifting all the time, and the histories and memories tied up with translations. There's a lot of churning going on. The selection of texts, the way translators use language. And so we'll start with Rita. I just wanted to introduce a beautiful metaphor which Harish, by the way, a Tamil critic, introduced. A beautiful line. His name is Idai Kadar, and talking about Thiruvalluvar's Thirukural, he said that writing those aphorisms stated in just 2 lines, those profound truths, is like piercing a mustard seed and pushing 7 oceans into it. Ambai used that line in an essay published by Zuban about 10 years ago. And she said, working with her translator, working with Lakshmi Holmstrom, she felt it was like that, transferring her work in Tamil into English. So Rita, I'd like you to comment on that. What do you feel about the actual work in the theatre of translation, and just to lift off? Long ago, Harish said, and he's forgotten, of course, he quoted an Urdu couplet, and he said, our situation is, we've lost the earth, but we haven't yet gained the heavens or paradise. It was a lovely quotation. So could you share your thoughts here?
Thanks, Minnie. I think I want to sort of think not only about the intractability in the actual act of translation, but there's also an intractability that sort of precedes the act of translation. I think too much emphasis gets laid upon the challenge of translating, what happens when you actually translate, which sort of may vary and differ depending on what languages you're working with, what genres you're working with, and so on. For instance, when I translated about 2 years ago this novel called Vaad, which in English means fence, and it's about a Muslim girl from a part of Saurashtra who's looking for a house in the city of Baroda or Ahmedabad. It's an unnamed city. And she's looking for a mixed mohalla to live. And she doesn't find one. She continues to be relegated to a very ghetto-like housing. So the entire novel is about her going around on her scooty and looking for this house. And most of it was fairly simple to translate. It's set in an urban context. And to say that I had these huge challenges would be a falsification. I think there was this one instance when, because she's the first generation learner in her family, and she tries to fashion her own self differently by trying to speak a different Gujarati than the one her old mother used to speak. So she's the first one from a village to go to school. And so she would come home and tell her mother that, you know, Aje bene au shikhwadiyu, our teacher taught her this. And the mother would say, Ben je kehte hachu ho. You know, what the teacher says is truth. Now, she would say hachu instead of sachu. Really speaking, their generational difference, their class difference, their moments of modernity were pivoted around this one consonant, which is sir or her. So she would say to her mother, ba hachu nahi sachu, which is what a proper Gujarati would be. So just that difference between a shusht Gujarati, which would say sachu, and an older person and a non-literate person's Gujarati, which would say hachu, was sort of arrested me for a moment, and there were things I had to do to it to be able to give the reader a sense that, look, there is a transition that's happening linguistically, right? And that is symptomatic of the many forms of self-fashioning. So sometimes it can be literally as simple as this. So I don't think it is so much a matter of what only the text contains. It also, as a translator, what you think is important. And that could be a call you are making. So I'm not sure all acts of translation have this level of difficulty. I think they have a level of relationship that you come to bear with a text. And I think that is where the focus needs to shift.
We could... Thanks, but we could still be looking at a very difficult text from, say, 60 or 70 years ago. I take it that this is a recent text.
Yeah.
We'll go by turn. So, yeah, I mean, in the previous session, Astri was saying how the translation from Ibsen's Norwegian in He2, different kinds of Norwegian, two kinds, when it was translated into English, there's a portion where in The Master Builder where the protagonist's sense of equilibrium is breaking down, and he starts to swear, and there are these half sentences, but all of that is erased in English. Vivek, this line-by-line fidelity, which I actually think that that's important, and then on a first draft, and then perhaps you rework, you improvise, and in order to get the conversations, particularly conversations, dialogue, you have to be really inventive. The translators be really creative and inventive. So with this subcontinental diversity which we enjoy, would you say that our Indian canon is something of a gacha gocha, like your title? Would you agree with Rita? Because I also would ask you about the older works you've done, Munshi's books and Makwan. What, according to you, as a writer who's both imprisoned in English in one sense and released by it, what's the sensation you have as a writer? Would you like to share those thoughts? And I really want to ask why you haven't tried translating your own work. You could work with somebody else also, because the inner, the spirit of the work is, it's really impossible to share, very difficult for somebody else to collect and to read your mind so completely. It's a sort of a psychological transference, really. So I'd like you to share your thoughts.
I really don't want to go into the discussion on canons because I don't think I'm not interested in it, first thing. Second is, there is a lot of politics involved in forming it. And also, I have not found it very useful because, as you said, it keeps shifting naturally. It must be, it should be. But let's keep it out for now. Let me look at it as a reader and as a writer. How do I look at works from other languages? To give an example of Vaikam's work, when I first read him, it was a bad translation in English, full of spelling mistakes, badly printed. But that quality of writer just stood out. And then I went after him. And I would do that because it is, I really sought him. Then there were translations available in Kannada. Then now I have read him almost all of whatever is available in translation into Kannada and English. So it is that kind of a pursuit that makes me happy. That is how I would like to go to another literature of another language. Similarly, I have done with many other writers, Malayalam, since we are talking about Malayalam, whether it is Paul Sakaria or Mukundan or Madhavan, Sachin, and Setu, who is here today. So all, I have gone after them. And that interests me. And that I think is because, see, what happens is many times we say that, this book is good, that book is good. But for me, it is important to understand a writer. It's one book, of course I like. I may not like the other books, but the writer represents and brings a kind of a sensibility. Some books are good, some books are not good. And that good is so relative. So I would like to see how and different aspects of life and this worldview has been expressed in his works or her works. So that is really what interests me. And for me, that is kind of a canon, rather than something which is defined by academicians and for various other purpose. Now, coming back to your second question of why I don't translate myself, it is, if I could translate into English, I would have written in English. Yeah. The fact that I write in Kannada is because I have a very special relationship with that language. And that is something which I don't have with any other language. Maybe I can have with Konkani, maybe, if I make some effort. But not certainly with English or any other language. I mean, I know Marathi, I know Hindi, but not certainly with any other language. And that is because it is very deep inside for a writer. And it cannot be just explained, or I can't write in English just because I know that language. It's not there. It's much more deeper, and it is so deep that it is. When I worked with my translator, the discussion was never on the meaning of a word or a sentence. It was always what is beneath the text. So those discussions, if you listen to, you may see that, what are they discussing? I mean, you should actually be translating, take a sentence, take a paragraph, translate and be done with. But that's not what it is. Because what I was trying to tell him is to see and look at the voice and the tone, one aspect of the work, so that you can use certain words. You can use certain expressions, you can use certain descriptions if you understand it. Because that is what I do as a writer. To give an example, in that translation, in my English translation, a word jokingly was used by the translator, and I also overlooked it, it just went by. And one of the editors caught this and asked whether can that word be used. And when I looked at the English translation, I felt, yes, it can't be used. And then I went back to my original, and fortunately it was a different word. So see, that particular word could not have been used in that conversation because that relationship does not allow them to use that word. But you can just overlook it because it comes at the beginning of the work. And only when you reach the end, then you realize that you can't use this word. I mean, what I mean is unless you read it several times, you can't catch it. But the writer is conscious of this and make sure that, it is used in a certain way. These were kind of discussions that I have had. So I hope I have answered your question.
Yeah, in a sense you have, but I hear over and over again what's left unsaid, what comes through, what comes through the system of the cultural systems and the memories, the things that cannot be said. That's also important, but it also hangs on what is actually said on the page, doesn't it? Vivek can say the things he said as a creative writer, but when you're teaching translation as an academic, how do you view this same thing, and how do you actually teach translation? Because I'd really like to stick with the theme given here, Canon. He provides the material with which you build the canon. Since you're a translator, literary critic, and academic, you must be thinking about these things all the time. So I'd like you to expand a little more on that. Also work in, because we don't have much time, I'd like to just repeat this quotation that Tagore said that literature is a surplus of civilization. But what if most of the citizens of this country are illiterate? How do you get their stories and the people who write about them or when they speak? How do you work that into this? I think this canon is a very dangerous system, and I'd also like to share, I think I've told you this before, how Meenakshi Shivaram, who translated Topi Shukla for OUP many years ago, she once presented a paper at a college seminar, and just 2 or 3 pages, and she said, why are we, the English literature fraternity and the language fraternity, allowing publishers to decide what we should teach in translation courses? And I wasn't there, but later I said, you should collaborate with us. Give us your suggestions. Get together with the language departments. If you're going to teach translation seriously, tell us what you want to. And some numbers have to sell, so we should be able to. You support us and we'll support you. So could you talk about that? I think that mic is working.
It's not it's working with me. So I think I want to respond very, very briefly to the question of canon, to say that my response to that is actually to expand it, not so much in terms of the archive, which of course we all talk about, but also I think our relationship and our conversation and our discourse about translation itself is highly canonized. And I think that relationship needs to be expanded to understand the many constitutive roles that translation comes to play, not only as something that happens by consequence, but also as something that happens even before we sort of begin to officially translate a text. So, for instance, my engagement with translation in a class, whether I'm doing Indian literature or translation theory, is to expand that, to kind of understand, for instance, what might be the constitutive role of certain kinds of Russian or certain Bengali text might have in the text that we are studying. So it is not only about how has this been translated into English, but it is also to see that what might be the subtextual forms of translations that come to inhabit a particular text. So the emphasis is not only to kind of look at the empirical and the mechanical acts of translation and to say whether something has been achieved here or something has been lost here, but to see translation as a very, very important epistemology by which certain forms of knowledge is created and by which certain forms of knowledge is generated and so forth. So for instance, even the text which sort of brought us into acquaintance, Mini Angaliyat by Joseph McQuan was its translation, which was highly kind of an involved and an absorbing exercise for me, because Joseph McQuan and I became friends. I went and stayed in his village. It required a fair amount of almost field work and ethnographic work, because the kind of houses he was talking about, I didn't know those houses existed. There were parts of a house, a kitchen, domesticity that I needed to understand with him. So it was a very, very personal journey. But besides that, what it also was in some sense, it was an understanding of rural Gujarat. It was an understanding of caste in Gujarat. So if I'm able to understand, for instance, something like the Kshatriya desire to become part of the OBC today, although that's not a Dalit class, but I'm able to understand that better because as a certain form of, again, self-fashioning and Sanskritization, characters in Angadiyat are becoming very Kshatriya-like when they are trying to sort of redefine themselves as a Dalit class. So what I'm trying to say is that for me, translation is a mode, is a way of seeing things. It is not this literary, written, defined act between two languages, one Indian and one English. I think it has a much deeper and an all-embracing sort of a relationship with it. So in that sense, I think that any teaching about translation has to bring that to students. I think if we were doing a workshop on translation, कि आपको गोदान कैसे हिंदी में अनुवाद, गुजराती में अनुवाद करना है, that's a different thing altogether. But that is not what I'm doing. I think I like the idea of students going away thinking that, you can't see the world without translation in some sense. This is how life defines itself. Life defines itself by a constant change and a morphing and a transferring and a going over to something and being redefined by something else. If we are not able to see that philosophically, then I think we would not be able to do justice to how profound this whole subject is.
The translating culture, I see that we have just 10 minutes left. If anyone would like to ask a question.
I have two questions. One is, I think our regional languages are...
Speak up.
It's not working? Hello? Yeah. Okay. Our regional languages are gender, class, and caste specific. But English is not that much. For example, when you use the word you, in Hindi it is aap, tum, tu. So the English reader in India will understand and he mentally will translate, even though it is not mentioned in the text, aap or tum, tu, according to his choice. But how do you translate? And you have to add extra word to that. This is one question. Secondly, see, you talk about translation and it matters, but the regional publishers are very good. They identify writers and then they ask for the test. Sometimes I'm not able to fulfill their timeline. But English publishers are sitting somewhere we don't know, and they engage mediators to identify work in regional languages. If I don't toe the line of the mediator in terms of his understanding about caste and religion, then I'm neglected. So why do we suffer? So why can't the English publishers reach out to the writers themselves? I know they are loaded with a lot of manuscripts, I understand, but at least they can identify some few writers and reach out to them, right?
Well, the English publishers are also loaded with ignorance. Very few of them actually know more than one Indian language. Very few of them function and read, the little magazines, keep up with reviews and things like that. They do have advisors. That too is a Kothari. They also have their... But I should think you're powerful enough to have been to bash down on...
Pending for 20 years, and I translated myself.
Okay.
So I couldn't find a translator.
I'm sure you will. Any other questions? Anything about Canon, about the transference, about how it's impacting? One of the things I notice is that writers in English are actually taking translations seriously. Writers in English, I think, they probably think in their mother tongues, but can write only in English, the opposite of something like what you said, Kannada. I noticed that a lot of experiences that they probably are not, it's not first-hand, but it's sort of carom shooting from translations, the ethos of rural India, of subaltern classes. Many of these things tend to come through now in writers who are famous for writing only in English. Does anyone have any thoughts there? Because there needn't be any language war. We really are moving, this huge caravan is moving together with all different, yes.
No, talking of this moving between languages and all, because my mother tongue, I speak mostly in Assamese, but I write in English. So this is one problem that I'm facing as a translator, which I'm translating a book right now, which is very urban, okay? And a lot of English is used, but English is used just as, you know, language defines caste and class and all that. So in this case, language defines character and the state of that character at that particular time, because he uses English in a particular way when he's emotionally, and that is very significant. But how do I put across the significance of that usage of English because the whole thing is English anyway, and how do I tell them that, you know, short of using italics or something, that this is originally spoken in English and for a particular purpose. The author, you made the character use English for a particular purpose. How do I differentiate?
I can very quickly suggest a solution which we used successfully in Oxford a few months ago. This is the first Kannada novel, Kothari. There are 4 kinds of language used there. There's upper class Kannada, highly educated people speaking Kannada. There's the kitchen Kannada, there's Sanskrit, and then there is, as is the case in all those early novels which were written in Indian languages, some people showing off the use of English, so they use those words in English. We use different kinds of fonts, yes, and there too we have a problem, because a particular, italics of course signifies that something is an excerpt from a poem or a letter or something, all sorts of things we did, and we experimented with a lot of things. Vanamala was very patient, and it succeeded. In other words, please buy a copy of Indirabai. Any other questions? Yes.
It's about my novel Pandavapuram, which you yourself edited about 25 years back. There's a major character called Jaran. It's a paramour. When it was translated in Hindi, the translator, who is an accomplished professor, used the word jar, their Sanskrit equivalent. I think that single usage spoiled the entire novel, because somebody suggested it could have been a colloquial term for paramour. See, that was a huge loss for me after that.
We were quite inexperienced at that time, Prema and myself. And so saying, secret lover or whatever it is, we could have said Jaran Purushar and explained it, but we didn't have the confidence or the experience in Hindi. No, but even in English, we could have actually used, we could have been a bit more skillful at that time. This was many years ago. Perhaps it's time to do a fresh translation of it, because it really was something of a milestone work. Admired outside the country, I think translated also. Yes. So, in fact, there is also a strong feeling that these kind of milestone works should be retranslated every 10 or 15 years, which we did with Bharatipura, by the way. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. My name is Rita Chablani, and I am Sindhi, and I'm an author. I have authored 3 books in English. Now, I have quite a few family members who are writers of great stature. They're not alive, but their family wants me to do Sindhi, Arabic script, which I can't read, but they want me to do the translation in English, into English. Now, how do I need a translator to read out those books and get the nuances right? And do those books have any relevance in modern times? For instance, would people be interested in a Sindhi work being translated?
Oh, certainly. And you could work with collaborators. Have them read out you could, or listen or have other people, or have a first draft prepared, and then you could work on it, consult with people who do know that language but not English. There are lots of things you can do. But it has to be a collaborative work. And the Bible was, three different committees worked on the KJV. Rita, you want to say something? Rita, basically from Sindhi, you're not Sindh, you know.
Oh, she
So you have another Rita.
So people forget that I'm a Sindhi. All questions I get are about the Gujarati work that I've done. But I think some of these works, if they can be transcribed in the Devanagari script, then I'm sure you'd be able to handle.
yes.
I'm guessing you know the language, you don't know the script.
I don't know the script.
But you do know the language.
Yeah, I belong to a generation where my
Yeah.
father was a professor and he spoke English at home.
Yeah, yeah.
So I
no,
didn't
this
learn
this
the
is a
script.
very, very severe problem with Sindhi, which is that the generational shift is also manifest in this, that people can't read the Arabic script. But there would be people who are transcribing because the Sindhi Sahitya Academy is constantly doing it. And I think it might be a good idea to get that done and then handle it yourself. I mean, this would be my sense.
And would publishers be interested in a
But that
translation?
depends on what those books are like, right?
Oh, yeah.
I don't think these are things that we know in principle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we have to close. I'd like to end with a little remark on translation, which I read a long time ago. It says that translators are like bumblebees. The bumblebee's weight, the body weight, exceeds its wingspan. And strictly speaking, it shouldn't be flying at all. But the bumblebee doesn't know this, and it tries to fly and does fly. So translators are like that. We still get through. Thanks a lot.